Hello, this is No One, episode 21 of Zero Hour by No One Unscripted, and welcome to anybody who is going to be watching, who is watching. Today I'm going to address some of the things that I think I missed with the first part of ethnography of sociopathy and supremacy. And I did briefly mention in the beginning of the second video that I was going to talk about Hitler and um, Hannibal Lecter and then Donald. So what we discussed, or what I talked about in the previous video, and I'm talking in a slightly hushed tone because my menaces are napping at the moment, and I want to keep them as napping as possible, as you can see right there. Yeah. So now I gave you a sort of a top-down and also a personal perspective of the psychology that goes behind supremacy and how false that is. But today I want to tell you a little bit about what I have discovered over the years through my studies in history and law, and then just, going kind of obsessive with researching on the internet, various sources. And when I say the internet, I just don't mean any old source. Again, go to my How to Research Information YouTube video in No One Unscripted to figure out how I research information. Now, so first, I mean, the thing started with who I am, the roots of where I came from. And then as you grow up, you find links and you find these stories. And incidentally, when I was born, I was always been a very spiritual person, even from very young age. Some of my youngest memories is going up to the top of our house with my grandmother and praying in the temple that we had, shrine that we had at the top floor of the house. So I saw the swastika symbol in many places in the Hindu faith. And then the other place that most of the West knows the swastika to be part of is part of Adolf Hitler's Nazi flag. And then you hear about, and the first time I heard about it, it was kind of funny to me because anybody who has any sort of Vedic history or Indian history, and especially people who are part of that tradition, when they hear the word Aryan taken in a negative context, and then weaponized and then brutalized and made into a symbol of genocide, when the swastika literally is about swastika, to keep the well-being. One of the differences between the Vedic swastika used all over India and the one you see on the Nazi flag is that the Nazi flag swastika is turned backwards and tilted. And so I suppose, in a way they're right. In a way, Adolf Hitler's ideology took the word Aryan and turned it on its head. So the word Aryan means noble. And from an Indian subcontinent perspective, it is a very interesting story, actually. So this is a brief history of the very first true immigrant nation. And I've thought about this for a long, 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 long time. And I didn't know how to like formulate it or write about it. But since I'm going not, unscripted, and these are perilous times, I'm going to give it a shot. So about 13,000 years ago or so, 12 to 13,000 years ago, North African and some African tribes went from the African subcontinent, the African continent, up through where you have Saudi Arabia and Iraq, Iran, all of those areas, and up through, and then went to the Hindu Kush Mountains, where current day Pakistan is, and then migrated down the coast of the Indian subcontinent and populated the southern part that hugged the coast of the Indian subcontinent. And at that time, the Indian subcontinent had many indigenous tribes, like the Native American tribes and the tribes of Australia and the different tribes of the Chinese and Mongolian plains, and even the tribes of Europe, Africa, tribes of Africa, and all of these other tribes. Anyway, so they had indigenous tribes in the Indian subcontinent. One of the indigenous tribes that are still around are called the Shantals, in the central West Bengal part of India, which is an eastern state in India. Now, about a few thousand years after that, a group of people descended from the Caucasus Mountains, which is Croatia, Romania, that area, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, the Caucasus Mountains, and the surrounding areas, and migrated from the north into what is present-day Kashmir, and then down through the Hindu Kush Mountains, and then down onto the Indian subcontinent. Now, so the Indian subcontinent's like this, right? I'm thinking of how I'm showing you. The Indian subcontinent is like this, and Caucasus Mountains is over here, and Africa is over here. And this is where the African population came from this and went this way, whereas the Caucasian population went from here and went this way. And there was some meeting that happened over here, and then the rest of it was the African population here, and then became the Caucasian population over here. Now, this Caucasian population called themselves the Aryans, the noble ones. They were fair skinned. And as they settled and as they evolved, different civilizations came into being that coexisted and in some places decimated the indigenous tribes and laid kingdoms down. And from the very first written evidence of this culture rising up comes from the Vedas, the Rig Veda being the oldest of them. I think it's about some 5,000 or 6,000 years old. I'm not sure. I would say about 6,000 years old, 6.5. So obviously there was an oral tradition before that, just like before the Bible was written, the Old Testament, Torah, Talmud, there was an oral tradition of these practices for thousands of years before the script came into being. We forget today that this writing wasn't always around. We came up with it. Talking wasn't always around either. We were at some point very close to not, chimpanzees and apes, and so I'm not going to go there. Anyway, and so the Indian subcontinent became the very first true immigrant nation because these two and then from the eastern side, the Chinese and the Mongolian descended people also influenced. So if you go to the eastern side of India, there's the phenotypical, the facial structures of a lot of people are more rounded. And if you look at my face is, it's kind of like a hodgepodge. It really is kind of like a hodgepodge because there is influence of the East, there's influence of Caucasian descent, and then there's some influence of the indigenous of the subcontinent. The features are quite amalgamous, you could say. What would be something that would resembling somebody of interracial descent in the United States? And so the Vedas came into being, and as the years progressed, hundreds of thousands of years, the caste system came about as a means of feudal system that described each person's duty to the society or the community which they were part of. But with, as I said, the Industrial Revolution in Europe, with the emerging from the dark ages of Europe, and with the advent of gunpowder and the focus on weaponry warfare and knighthood and knights as the onus of the European powers of expansion and exploration happened, it uh, the same thing happened in India with the different dynasties, the successive dynasties, and the evolution. In fact, a lot of historians, anthropologists, Joseph Campbell, who is no longer with us, but was brilliant, sort of um, person who talked about mythology and its construction throughout history, that in the story of the Ramayana, which is a Vedic story, the antagonist, which is the Ravana from Lanka, which is present day Sri Lanka, and the darker people who were the Asuras, or I think, and they were the antagonists in the Vedic lores, you know, and in Ramayana, which is the first epic of that comes down from the Vedic tradition. Now, as that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, it sort of got codified into mythology, but also a cultural tradition that is quite alive and just woven through. You know, that's this massive expansion of Hinduism and Vedanta happened in the Indian subcontinent, and then thousands of years after that, I mean, intermittently, there were many Persian tribes, many Muslim tribes that immigrated into the Indian subcontinent. There were Nawabs and sultans in India long before the Mughal Empire that started in the mid 1400s. So why am I telling you this story? Because of the origin of the word Arya, and what that's the so they were founders of a society. The closest you can think about, and quite similar, is like the Mayflower families of America, or the Carnegies, Rockefellers, and all of the other amazing families, and some not so amazing families, who sort of hold up. And the way it would go was by first in time. So something that evolved in the Indian subcontinent over time was kind of a registry, which today is called the Gotra, which is kind of only used when people of the Hindu faith are married to other people of the Hindu faith. And because they believe that the Gotra resembles a direct male lineage of a certain tribe that originated. So you know your ancestry. Every Hindu who comes from a practicing Hindu family and has been married knows their goal, or anybody who's studied, because I'm not going to get married, not even to a man's. I don't want to get married. So it. The reason why I'm saying this is because that's where Hitler got this ideology of supremacy. Is that these people immigrated somewhere and then they conquered that place and then culturized that place and made it better, and they were light skinned and tall and in comparison to the people of the Indian subcontinent. And so I'm going to espouse that as well. Ironically, he was short and a brunette. Hitler was. So I mean that brings me to the psychopathy, this psychology behind how what I look at a sociopath like Hitler, or the fictional character Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, that's played by Anthony Hopkins, and then the series. I don't know who the series is. I don't know his name, but it's a good series. And somewhere in Hitler, there was an inadequacy that was sort of reinforced by the largely Jewish panel of reviewers who denied him entry into the art school in Vienna. If I'm not wrong, Vienna or somewhere else. It was an art college. So it was either that or maybe that was the last straw. I don't know. And honestly, I don't care about his history before that. But I mean, I can bet you anything and everything that there were many cases in which he felt marginalized, made fun of, fringed by others around him. And somehow or another, that onus went on the Jewish people. And because maybe he was bullied at some point by Jewish people, maybe he, and in this instance that broke the camel's back, it really did it for him. And it went from there, and it just sort of lost control at the very end of it. If anyone knows about paragraph 175, it was part of their code, the Nazi code, that also criminalized homosexuality. And there's a documentary about it. You should look it up, paragraph 175. And it's horrifying and it's heartbreaking. So, I feel, and in the fiction story of Hannibal Lecter, Lecter went through a really traumatic childhood. At some point, I suppose the story goes that he had to cook his sister and then feed it to these people, and then eventually eat his sister as well. Which, I mean, yeah. But I think the story here is, something snaps, and when that snap happens, it's a permanent snap. And now we go to Donald, and we see that the relationship especially after his nephew came out, his niece came out and talked about his family history and his legacy and the story behind her grandfather and his father, Donald's father, Fred Trump. It made complete sense to me, because that some aspects of that I saw in my grandfather and my father. There was a coldness between generations there, and there was something unhealthy going on, and neither of them benefited from it, and neither did anybody around them. And it, in a fundamental way, broke Donald. I don't know what the sort of Vienna art school moment was for Donald, but something happened. And that snap is what we are, as a country and as a nation, are experiencing in full swing. Now, this part of a sociopath, and see, the supremacist ideology is just somebody who has snapped and who is otherwise quite intelligent, but somebody who just didn't have the patience and the persistence and to keep going and failing and learning who was convinced that they were just perfectly good exactly where they were, which, by the way, is one of the things that Hannibal Lecter is not, which is how he continues to be successful. It's really funny. And I just thought of that. So I guess the creator of Hannibal Lecter really thought about that part of it, huh? Uh, and I don't read much of the movies I've watched, the series I've watched, but the impression that I get from that storyline, that and I kind of feel like that that person who was the psychologist who finally gets him, uh, or the therapist who finally gets him, because I have two dogs and I'm insane, half insane. Um, sometimes I identify as what you would call an empath. Like I can actually feel the pain of people and things and animals, even things. It's like a thing that's in neglect gives me pain. I don't know why. Um, but I also understand that over the course of the years, through my suffering, had I at some point snapped to the point of completely losing control and never acknowledging that I had lost control and, making amends for that, which I have done many times, I would have gotten to become closer to that, where I wouldn't have been able to accept my own mistake because my ego got in the way of it. Because my ego was a defense mechanism that was now permanently hard built into my subconscious to be able to guard me from anything like that broke me that one time. That was that permanent break. So that permanent break point is, that's, I think, what separates every single person from a psychopath or a sociopath. And some people are predisposed. I mean, a lot of people who hasn't. There are very few people in the world who would, shoo away a mosquito, and their first instinct wouldn't be to just smack the shit out of it. Like you have to think about, like, what child hasn't thought about crushing an ant? But life isn't about the ability or being able to crush the ant. The story of life is about learning why you shouldn't, and then that becoming part of your daily life. And I think that that's one basic thing that psychopaths and sociopaths are incapable of. And that's why it's much easier for them to go to supremacy as the refuge and the explanation. And that leaving that supremacy and coming back to the reality of the situation, of everybody's situation, not just theirs, the fear is so debilitating that it is better to die. And that's a really dangerous place to be for people whose egos are so big that they only see themselves, because that's the only thing that'll ever sustain them is themselves. And therefore dying is also not an option. I mean, this is the worst place to be for anybody. And I don't honestly, even if I had Jeff Bezos's money, I would not ever, ever wish to be in that state of mind. And if the devil came to me tomorrow and said, I'll give you $1 billion, I'll say, as long as you do that, as long as you change and snap and refuse now to ever be wrong, because something in you was so fundamentally broken by something. It's very, very aloof there, right? And this is the vicious cycle of violence. This is the vicious the chaos and the abyss of violence, you know. And this is the part that is, oh, now they're up and looking all over the place. Enough. Lalun, enough. Lalun, enough. Give me 5 more minutes, man. 5 more minutes. It's not going to stop. I don't know what he has to lick. Never goes out. And he's not, I'm not going to, anyway. So, yeah, I wanted to give you that perspective, because I think that my previous videos, I've talked about seditious conspiracy, I've talked about treason, I've talked about defiance, and I stand by every single statement I make until I am proven wrong. And please try or do it, prove me wrong. I mean, I welcome it. One thing that somebody said that I want to clarify is the Texas opinion. In the Texas opinion, the Supreme Court said that all pending matters are now moot after saying the statement that Texas has shown no cognizable interest in how Michigan administers its election laws. They don't have standing. And then, I'm paraphrasing, of course, and then they said that pending matters, because there are other accompanying matters with it, are moot. And somebody commented on my thread, and then commented with a list of other propaganda, but this part was substantive, and so I'll talk about it. That, you know, all pending matters were moot, and I said in my video that future matters, that included future matters. Now, the reason why I said that, of course, let me say that it was an interpretation of mine to say that future matters mean the same thing. But the reason why I stand by saying that this ruling on standing is a substantive ruling on whether one state has a cognizable interest in how another state operates its elections and election laws, doesn't have standing, it doesn't just apply to Texas and the case here, Texas and Michigan, but also to the pending matters that were at hand, which means that all of those matters now become the precedent for any other subsequent suit that another state comes up with that challenges a different state's election laws. To that extent, this law is a substantive ruling and binding precedent on any case coming from one state suing another state about that other state's election laws. They don't have standing. And this, all of the other matters of whether the actual laws of Michigan were right or wrong, that forum, the proper forum, is a state court, and the highest forum is a state Supreme Court, because it is administered by a state election law. This is what we call checks and balances, you know. And what you're seeing today of all of the hyperbole going around, I'll tell you that if the checks and balances and the separation of powers didn't work in the United States, if what's happening right now, if Donald Trump were the elected leader of France, even France today, or any other country, this system would not have sustained. Donald Trump would have taken power. Because the system of government laid out in the United States Constitution is riddled with checks and balances, and it is all about the disassembling and the reconsolidating of power from one place to another place to another place to another place to another place. So while it may seem that in some places the power is, magnificent and completely without any sort of encumbrance, it is never true. As I've mentioned in my pardon power video, that the pardon power is the most limited plenary power in the history of plenary powers. Because in and of itself, the word pardon means you have to have done something to be pardoned for it. Anyway, go watch that video if you want to. So it's important that we think about this and the psychology as we go into January 6th and also his speech on January 4th, because you know for a fact that there's not going to be anything in the January 4th jargon that's, not about him. It's going to be all about him, and there's going to be nothing else. And at this point, the only thing we can do is keep going and supporting our president-elect and making sure that things don't go awry. And mind you, something came out recently that in the news that said that the Secret Service is bringing back some old-time Secret Service agents and other Secret Service agents that the Biden team trusts, because there is suspicion that there are some people in the Secret Service who have a personal allegiance to Trump versus having the oaths to the United States Constitution as their as a thing that they need to be protecting, because that's what their oath is to. It's not to a person. And if that were the case, if they were trying to harm Joe Biden, and if something were to happen to Joe Biden, let it be very clear that it is not Donald Trump who continues to remain in office after January 20th. If for some reason Joe Biden is incapacitated on that day, Kamala Harris is the one who takes the oath of office to become the 46th president of the United States. Remember that. In no scenario does Donald Trump have even a scintilla of chance, a subatomic chance of having legitimate power. He can have a reality TV show at Mar-a-Lago with all these, alternate electors that got together at, Hyatt's crematorium or someplace like that. I don't know. To say, oh, yes, you won. No, that's not how it works. It's just not how it works. And the military is going to stand down, as the Joint Chiefs have said. And it is, mind you. There are way more Colin Powells in our military than there are Michael Flynns. Way more. There are way more Vindmans. So I have faith in that. I have faith in that. So hold fast, and I love you. And all my haters, I love you too. Just keep on hating, because I definitely do use some of your comments to troll your great leader. So thank you so much, Lava. Bye-bye.